Hey, church family. I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement as we continue to pray for the recovery of our country. Now, I recently pointed out that scientists are, in fact, still wrestling with the question regarding the most common spread of the novel coronavirus. And while many of us have been led to believe that the virus is released into the air every time an infected person coughs or sings praise songs at church, the fact of the matter is that there isn't a single scientific study that I'm aware of which has actually demonstrated clinical evidence of the airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2. But listen, don't take my word for it. Instead, I encourage you to consider the expert opinion of the Penn Healthcare epidemiologist work group, which released a summary statement of their research at the end of July. This group of epidemiologists have assured us that there is no study that has demonstrated actual clinical evidence of the airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2. And with that being the case, there's no scientific reason for us to think that the Rona is being spread at church simply because we gather together and sing the praises of Jesus Christ. Sadly, many of us have been led to believe that COVID-19 is airborne, and the only way for us to protect ourselves is to wear a mask. And so you see people wearing a mask as they're driving down the road. You see people wearing a mask as they're out walking in the park. People are wearing masks everywhere, and with a fear that, COVID-19 is just in the atmosphere, ready to get us, and despite this widely accepted belief, there's actually good evidence that helps us to see that masks really aren't as effective as some health officials would lead us to believe. The proof of my point is supported by the argument of one researcher who examined the spread of COVID-19 in Israel. It was actually at the end of June when Israeli officials began to enforce their mask mandates, which included an increase of fines. They doubled down on the fines and started enforcing them. And while you might imagine that the infection rate immediately began to drop as more and more people in Israel were forced to wear their masks, the fact is that the infection rate began to increase and at a steady rate. Now, it seems to me that if the spread of the virus is in fact airborne, then the mask mandate, it should have worked. Well, sadly it didn't. More and more people were infected. The same researcher also compared the infection rate that occurred there in Israel to the infection rate that took place in the neighboring Lebanon. It should be noted that there is no mask mandate in Lebanon, and there was only a partial lockdown. And yet the deaths per day in Lebanon are comparable to the deaths per day in Israel. They're basically the same. Now, it seems to me that if the goal is to prolong life, and it is, and if the goal is to slow the spread of the virus, and we should, listen, the mask mandate in Israel didn't help them, and it really wasn't any different from the spread that was taking place in Lebanon, where there is no mask mandate. Now, in light of this data from Israel and Lebanon, it's important for us to remember that there are no studies that have demonstrated actual clinical evidence of the airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2. And yet this really is the basis for these mask mandates, that COVID is in the air and it's going to get you unless you got a mask on. Now, listen, there is some level of potential, and don't get me wrong, because if an infected person coughs right into your face, well, there's most certainly a risk of infection, but this really isn't that common. I don't think most people are going to sit there and cough in your face. And the most common way that COVID-19 is being spread is when a person touches a surface where viral droplets are found on that surface. And then before washing their hands, they accidentally transfer the viral load to their mouth, maybe through eating or to the nose. Maybe they've picked their nose or scratched their eye. This is how the virus is most commonly being spread. And with that being the case, listen, masks, they can actually be a point of contamination. And the reason why is because I'm sure you recognize most people wear masks that don't fit right. They're constantly sliding down the face. They're constantly dropping over the nose. And so people are constantly touching their face as they adjust their mask. If the goal is to stop touching your face and you got this mask on and you're constantly adjusting it, listen, most people adjust their mask how? They grab the area which has been filled with the moisture that has come out of their mouth and their nose. This area right here, it gets moist and it's filled with all the droplets, and then they grab that area and adjust the mask. Then, as they continue to adjust the mask all day long, the fingers are then covered with that moisture, which then they transfer to everything they touch. It's absolutely disgusting. I'm a germaphobe, and I watch this going on all day long, and it's just like, oh, it's so gross. Oh, and all of this actually increases the risk of spreading the infection as people, are grabbing this mask and touching everything else. We would do better just to cough into the elbow and these sorts of things. But listen, if you want to protect yourself from COVID-19, stop picking your nose. but seriously, before you touch your face, make sure that you've sanitized your hands. Because really, this is the best way to stop the spread of the virus. Make sure you get that, hand sanitizer, or go wash your hands after you've touched things. And just stop touching the face. With all this being the case, listen, Christians can feel comfortable as we gather together to worship our Creator, because I'm here to tell you that the virus isn't spreading simply because we're singing the praises of Jesus Christ. I invite you to join us right here at Calvary South Austin for our weekly services. Let's corporately gather together to sing the praises of our Savior. And let's do that with the comfort of knowing that the Lord has a plan for all of this, and He's in control of all of this. And so let's just wash our hands before we touch our face, and that way we can protect ourselves from this virus. Now, if you'd like to know more about our service times and the measures that we're taking to sanitize our facilities, well, you can find all this information right here at calvarysouthaustin.com. I hope to see you soon, but until I do, let's continue fighting the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.